Hello, everybody. Welcome back into another episode of the Simon and Friends podcast on YouTube. I am here today with Ben Parker of Box Score Network. He does Odds On Favorite. He does the Simon and Friends podcast audio version frequently. You can also find him on Sports and Money KC, his YouTube channel. Make sure you go check that out. Ben, welcome in. How's it going?
I'm doing great. The draft was awesome. Getting to talk about it today is awesome. Getting to do a thing here in the middle of the day, which we don't usually do, is fantastic. I'm excited, man.
So we are continuing our mini series of position groups, three picks we liked, three picks we didn't like, just a way to kind of break down some of the players, some of the interesting trends that happen with the positions. A video with Austin Freed of Tricky Takes is up on the page now, going over wide receivers. Make sure you check that out. Um, Already up or soon to be up will be my video solo on the offensive linemen, where I liked them, where I didn't like them. Today, Ben is going to talk us through his defensive tackles, who he liked, where they went, and a couple picks that he didn't like quite as much. So, Ben, without further ado, man, kick us off. What was one defensive tackle pick in the 2024 draft that you really liked?
I'll just start off right at the top with the obvious one, I guess, by Byron
Hmm.
Murphy of Texas going to the Seahawks. We know the
Hmm.
Seahawks have been trying to upgrade that defense. They got a lot of cool pieces, but planting a rock like this right in the middle, I actually love that one. That was pretty exciting to me.
I'm so curious to see what McDonald does with this defense because part of what made him such a good defensive coordinator is he can do a bunch of different things, right? So now
Right.
that they have all these defensive linemen, some young edge rushers, some interesting corners, how does he deploy them? What personnel does he use? And then, yeah, how does he unleash Byron Murphy? Because we saw what he did with Madubuike for the last 2 years in Baltimore. How does he continue to do it in Seattle with Murphy and co? I'm really interested to see for sure. Awesome. Take me to your next one. Who else are you excited about?
So I love several of these. Sweat to the Titans, Fist to the Rams, but I'm going to settle in on Mason Smith out of LSU to the Jaguars. They could use that strength up the middle. And listen, you and I talked about in the mock draft preview, the over under preview, about how a lot of teams needed to be taking these defensive tackles more seriously.
Hmm.
Now that didn't
Hmm.
necessarily mean first round because there were so many other first round talents at other positions. But boom, we saw it here in the second round. They go 3, 4, 6, 7, 16, 17, 22. I mean, they exploded. They owned the second round, and
Yep.
rightfully so, because you put these rocks in the middle. If you know what you're doing on defense, they can really add the strength up the middle, set the table for everything else. But Mason Smith out of LSU really does that for the Jaguars with a defense that needs to get tougher. I really believe that. They've got a lot of the speed and the athleticism, but they needed to get tougher. Mason Smith is a guy who, for the past year and a half, 2 years, has been a first round projection, but he
Hmm.
slid through the process and through the second half of the college football year. So you know he's got some legit stuff there. I really like that one.
I know I had seen some Jags fans today express a lot of concern over it, and that makes sense because this team is a team that for 2, 3 years has been trying or wanting to be in win now mode, and they kind of take a more of a developmental defensive tackle at
Mm-hmm.
a position that arguably was a strength for the Jags. They were a pretty good run defense already last year, but Mason Smith has that size and athleticism on the defensive line that you just can't find very frequently. I mean, even compared to the other guys in the second round, he's just got something that they don't. And what you don't want to happen is as the weaker parts of this team develop, you don't want that defensive line to then age out or contract out, whatever. You want to keep it strong. I think this is an interesting pick as well. It's not going to necessarily be a big impact right away, which is frustrating for some Jags fans, but I still think it was a solid pick as well.
And that's an argument that I totally buy into. It's an argument I'm going to make against two other teams there. So I totally understand that side of it. It's just I liked Mason Smith that good. Is really where I'm coming from on that one.
If there was a specific corner that fans wanted to tell me they really wanted instead, I would listen to that argument, but there wasn't another positional need for the Jags that screamed to me so much once they got the receiver, right? They took care of that in the first round. So once they did that
Right.
to go get a high upside guy, I'm also a fan of. Take me to your third and final defensive tackle pick that you really liked in this draft.
Yeah, and again, I like so many of them, but I'm going to go straight to the Cleveland Browns in the middle of the second round with Michael Hall Jr. coming out
Mhm.
of Ohio State. This was not a guy that looked like a first round project in a lot of areas, but still, Cleveland Browns seem to know what to do with these guys, and for them to be able to continue. What I like about the Browns is that they don't do what other teams do, and that's they're like, oh hey, let's just grab a guy and this will make our line better. But they're actually each year building these lines, especially
Mhm.
the defensive line, just like the Eagles do with their defensive line. Every year they're building it, working on it. May not be first round, it might be second, third, fourth, but every year they're building it. And other teams, we've seen them late first over the past couple of seasons, maybe add an edge rusher when they have nothing else to go on their defensive line. And you realize, well, this rotational edge rusher is now just on an island by himself. He will contribute almost nothing because he has nothing else to work with. But Cleveland doesn't do that. They have guys all up and down this defensive line. They rotate them in and out. Every year they're building it, and the expensive guys go when they don't necessarily need them or want them anymore. So it's a continual process that Cleveland does. They know what they're doing with that. And I like Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State.
I will say for this one, I did find this a little confusing, and I know I just made the argument for a team continuing to build on its strength and everything you just
Yes.
said. The difference for me with the Browns is they've had such limited draft capital for the last couple of years, right? Because of the Deshaun Watson deal. Now, luckily for them, I wouldn't have put this on my hate list or anything because they don't have any huge glaring needs either, right? They went and got Jerry Jeudy, so they helped out their wide receiver room a little bit. In theory, Deshaun Watson's going to be healthy, but overall that quarterback room should be okay. They've developed their DBs and their defensive line over the years. We'll see what happens with Nick Chubb, right? If he's healthy this year, but I think that, they've done enough there down with the free agents they've brought in to kind of hold that position over, I think. So it's not bad, but with just such limited capital, I would have preferred, I made the argument for the Jags. If you could pick out a corner, right, that you would have liked over Mason Smith, I would listen to it. For the Browns, for example, every off-ball linebacker was available except for Edgerrin Cooper, right? So Junior Colson
Great
was
point.
there, Trevin
Yes.
Wallace was there. Um, I get the Peyton Wilson thing, right? The injuries, but if you could have had Junior Colson or Trevin Wallace just plugged into this defense and then maybe taken another defensive tackle later, I would have gotten that. But like we said, huge run on defensive tackles here in the second round. We didn't have another one until the end of the third. So maybe Cleveland was seeing where that drop off was on the defensive tackles, on the defensive line, and thought they needed to swing at it now.
It's a great point. And by the way, I am going to admittedly talk out of both sides of my mouth here. A lot of this draft did not seem to me to be whether or not I liked the player, because I liked a lot of the players these teams got. It seemed to be that I already have a plan in mind for that team and they didn't follow it. So I'm fixing to hammer a couple of teams who didn't follow what I thought they should have done, even though the player really is fine. But you agreed here with Cleveland. And at a certain point in the draft, you start converting to best player available
Yep.
because you already know that the talent pools at the positions you needed have already kind of been depleted. So at that point, it's just, well, we just like this guy better than anybody else that was sitting there at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're on YouTube and making podcasts because we can do that. We don't have to be decisive one way or another. We can change
No,
our minds whenever we want. Perfect. All right. Well, with that said, let's flip to the other side. Give me the first defensive tackle pick that you didn't really like. You weren't a huge fan of.
it's going to be the Commanders with Jazon Newton. And listen, I like Newton. Wouldn't have been surprised if he'd have gone in the first round. Would have been okay with it. And I actually, yeah, what I think is going on here with the Commanders is they've got way too much money invested at defensive tackle for guys who aren't superstars. They're good, but they're not superstars. You have a ton of money invested right there in those two starting defensive tackles. So here in a season or two, Newton takes over. You cycle out one of those guys, keep the other one, and Newton pairs along with him. So I like that, but I have been screaming at the Commanders to get on this offensive line for 3 years now, and they didn't touch it. They didn't even touch it. And to me, that's just no different than what the previous regime was doing. It was, oh, hey, let's go defense. We'll just execute tight. We'll just be a little smarter than everybody else. And I hate that, So while I love Newton and I like that it may save you some money over the next year or two, I don't understand for the life of me why they didn't go after offensive line in a draft that was loaded with offensive linemen. I cannot wrap my head around that.
I won't belabor the issue because in my offensive line video, which again is either already up or will be up shortly after you listen to this, I had the Commanders on my did not like list for their one offensive lineman they picked because for all the things you said, it was the wrong way to make the investment, it was the wrong way to do, and the idea that this team continues to invest in good defensive players, but they spend the majority of their money in free agency on defense, and they spend the majority of their draft capital on defense, all to not have a legitimate tackle anywhere on the roster is going to be a very big issue for Jaden Daniels and the rest of the team. Again, Jazon Newton is good. We have to see what they do with the incumbent defensive tackles because if he's just going to be a rotational defensive tackle for a year or even two, what was the point? What was the point? Go ahead and give me your second one. What's your second defensive tackle you pick that you didn't like too much?
And so the second one is the Falcons with the guy whose name I can't even pronounce. I'm not going
I'll
to
try
try until I hear
Rook
somebody.
or Horo Oro. We'll go with that.
That's a
Rook.
third different way I've heard it, so we'll go with that.
Big Rook. Big O.
There's nothing wrong with the player. He had slid down draft boards to late second, early thirds over the past, 4 or 5 months. You look back a year ago, he was right there in the first round in a lot of mocks. So there's nothing wrong with the player himself, but the Falcons could have used some other help in some other places. And it was all up and down this draft board to be had. They could have used edge rushers. They addressed that in the third round with Braylon Trice, who's a guy I like, but there were guys here within striking distance, late first round, early second round that they could have used just at other positions. I just don't see where this really makes a huge impact, even though, just like I said about the Cleveland Browns, they're going to add this guy into the rotation. It will help them. They believe in building the defensive line. So while I don't hate the pick, I just thought there were so many other things they could have done with it here for the Falcons. And so that's kind of why I'm on them. Plus, there were several other defensive tackles I liked better than this one, too. So I kind of hit them with double whammy right there on the Falcons.
And they traded up for the pick too, right? If I think they were like
Yes.
8 spots back originally or something like that. If they had just stayed there and taken him or stayed there and taken Braden Fisk or Mason Smith, we might feel a little bit different about it. To
Right.
jump teams, to give up capital, and then take him over Jerzon Newton, right? For example, we did think the Falcons could have taken Byron Murphy in the first round, so it's certainly not an issue of positional need. Now, for
Right.
me, I agree with you because I wanted this team to go corner early. I want to see what Raheem Morris and his staff, after coming from LA with that group they had last year, can do with this young, interesting group of defensive linemen, right? I want to see that. But that said, defensive tackle itself was a little thin for them, and it's aging. A lot of guys are over 30. So it's not horrible, but yeah, they traded up. They got a guy that was a little further down boards, but we'll have to see. Maybe this is a Raheem Morris guy. Maybe this is who he identified as. We need this specific player. Maybe they thought the Commanders liked him. There's an opportunity cost. I would have gone corner, but I'm with you. Not the best pick, but I don't dislike it too much.
Yeah, I don't hate it. The magic elixir is, can the coaching staff take whatever you did in the draft
Yep.
and make it work? And that's where it all, that's really where it begins. If I were the Falcons fans, I would have wanted the Falcons to either stay where they were and traded got a CB or defensive tackle right where they were, or traded up into the late first, where you were looking at guys like Darius Robinson out of Missouri, who would have been a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fun. You can mix and move
Mm-hmm.
them around. You
Mm-hmm.
had Nate Wiggins, the guy out of Clemson, right there. You
Mm-hmm.
had guys in late first that would have cost you just a little bit more that I think would have been bigger difference makers than what you got there. So that's just kind of where I'm at on that.
Yeah. And then for this last one here, you mentioned you love so many of these picks. So I'm gonna come in with a curveball for our number 3 didn't like pick, and I want to hear what you say. And it's Devondre Sweat of Texas going to the Tennessee Titans, second round, 6th pick in the round. And here's the reason I don't love it. I'm all for players getting a second chance. I'm all for players still getting the opportunity to come into the league and make as much money as possible and set themselves up for the future, and no, regardless of immaturity questions, right? Things like that. If it's just something at school where it's like, oh, his weight was a little off, okay, well, you need proper motivation then. And so draft him. Maybe you draft him 2 rounds later than the talent suggests, but draft him and get him figured out, get it worked out. But for what, 2, 3 weeks ago, right after the combine, to have a driving under the a DWI
Hmm.
charge brought against him and be doing that in the middle of the draft process, like you're basically in a 4 or 5 week job interview that's going to set you up for 5, 10 years at minimum, you hope. And you do this, and you still get pushed up draft boards. I mean, this guy was a second round projected pick 2 months ago, and he doesn't slide at all. Meanwhile, AD Mitchell, the wide receiver out of Texas, doesn't actually have any off field concerns, and it's just some anonymous scout, anonymous source, maturity issue stuff. We heard Chris Ballard, the GM of the Colts, go on a huge rant about it after the Colts took him in the second round. Now I'm sure Ballard's very happy that he was able to get him in the second round, but he
Right.
correctly said we can't just make up this stuff and without putting a name on it and drop guys down boards. Meanwhile, guys with legitimate off-field concerns are being pushed up boards, right? Plus the immaturity things and the weight concerns, and you wonder what all that's going to bring you. So again, this doesn't have to do with team fit. positional value, what else was on the board, the player as a player himself, but just the idea that this player moved up boards and got selected above AD Mitchell, who was widely believed to be a first round talent, when we have a tangible reason for one to have been moved down versus intangible for the other. But the guy with real off field concerns is the one moving up. I didn't love that pick by the Titans for that reason.
Yeah, it's a great point because you're absolutely right. One player has something we can definitely point to and say that was a problem. The other guy had whispers, and we weren't even sure what the whispers were about. It was just whispers. So I would have left Adonai back up in the first round. I really thought teams should have drafted him there.
Mm-hmm,
They
mm-hmm,
didn't, so the Colts are the benefactor of that.
mm-hmm.
But you're right here about Sweat. Basically nothing happened to him. The question always gets to be, if you're a team that's looking at these players, you're going to drop that player down, which in this case they didn't, but you're going to drop that player down is how far. At what point do I let that talent, which is now boosted past whatever round we're in, overcome whatever personality flaw that I thought I saw or definitely saw? Titans sat on it here. I mean, they ate it up, and it seemed like other teams maybe were going to as well. But it's not fair for the whispers to have hit Adonai so much and Sweat with actually something to point to. Not at all. The fairness factor is kicking in. Completely wrong there.
Absolutely. All right. That was our video. Thank you all so much for checking it out. Those were 3 defensive tackle picks that we liked and 3 that we didn't like in the 2024 NFL draft. Ben will be on the audio version of this podcast in a matter of weeks to do our year-round draft content. So make sure you're checking that out, the Simon and Friends podcast on Box Score Network. Make sure you're checking out Box Score Network, all the shows we do. We've added 2 shows recently. Very excited for that. You can follow that on Twitter at BScore Network. Follow Ben on Twitter. Follow Ben on Odds On Favorite. Check him out on YouTube, Sports Money KC. As soon as you're done with this video, go check that out. Ben, thanks so much for being on. Everybody, thank you for listening and watching. Have fun and be safe out there.